And Charlie Kirk, according to a longtime friend of his who I spoke to, considered Netanyahu a disgusting bully who was a manipulator and was fundamentally dishonest. So he was undergoing a transformation, a singular figure in the Trump world, unreplaceable.
Max Blumenthal just exposed Charlie Kirk's turn against Israel in the last days of his life in this clip, an interview with Andrew Napolitano, citing what he learned from his piece in the Gray Zone, which used an unnamed source close to Charlie Kirk, a long-term friend, citing many of these claims. And Max gets into what this means for the Trump administration, what it means for the FBI narrative right now, given the investigation into this matter. So let's get his take. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Max Blumenthal is here with a report of his latest investigations on the events leading up to the murder of Charlie Kirk. Max, you've been doing unbelievable investigative reporting. What have you learned?
Well, following my September 12th report, which provided background about the pressure, the mounting pressure that Charlie Kirk was under from pro-Israel forces, from Netanyahu's cutouts in the United States, I gathered more details. The piece, it hit like a sledgehammer. It really caused a lot of, I think it spoke for a lot of people, particularly within the conservative movement, which is changing among the youth on the question of Israel. And more people started coming out, and more people started talking, and people were talking to me. And these were people who had knowledge of a tumultuous, stormy meeting held in the Hamptons during the first week of August, convened, according to multiple sources, with knowledge of this meeting, intimate knowledge of this meeting, by the billionaire ultra-Zionist financier Bill Ackman, who is close to Netanyahu and his kind of network in the United States. Charlie Kirk was summoned along with an array of young, sort of vapid, very avaricious conservative influencers who seemed to be sort of in Israel's back pocket to set a very pro-Israel tone for this meeting. And Charlie Kirk was, according to one source, hammered by Ackman and others for allowing Israel critics, very prominent conservative voices like Megyn Kelly, Tucker Carlson, or the anti-Zionist Jewish comedian Dave Smith, to appear at his events.
Yeah, no doubt that caused a ruffle. We know that donors pushed back about that. You know, Charlie Kirk actually was pretty emphatic about that, even on the Megyn Kelly show about a month ago, talking about the backlash he received from that. This unnamed source confirms it. And guess what? That part of this, I totally believe that. It's completely believable that having Dave Smith in a debate against, you know, a know-nothing neocon Josh Hammer and completely hammering Josh Hammer, pardon the pun, and getting more applause at a young conservative event than having the Zionists get more applause than Dave. Dave destroyed him in that debate. Watch it. Don't take my word for it. I have an intrinsic bias against Zionists, but Dave got more applause in that debate. So did Tucker Carlson when he said not only is it not anti-Semitic to criticize Israel, but also that Jeffrey Epstein was likely working for Israel. That got rousing applause. Younger conservatives are turning away from Israel, so having these people on the stage was considered a severe threat to the pro-Zionist line. And we can see why they were trying to recapture the American right with Charlie Kirk, his influence over young people. Seth Dillon was apparently going to be part of this meeting or was involved in some way. Candace Owens just talked about that. I need to review all of that footage before going deeper into that, but Max is right.
And actually, Charlie Kirk was planning to host many of these same figures again in December, and he had just added to his TPUSA major, I think it's called America Fest in December, the premier critic of Israel in Congress. I didn't say Republican critic, I just said premier critic, because that's what she is now, Marjorie Taylor Greene, which...
Total hero, by the way. Total hero, especially lately. Holy balls, is she ballsy.
Really reflected his shifting views. And Ackman, according to multiple sources, had this meeting to basically bully Charlie Kirk into submission. Charlie Kirk walked away, according to one person, feeling like there was an attempt to blackmail him. He refused any offers of funding and also refused the offer to travel to Israel and meet with Netanyahu, which Netanyahu disclosed in the immediate wake of Netanyahu's death. He talked about this letter, but he didn't say whether Charlie Kirk refused or accepted. I've learned since that he refused. And then beyond that, he was becoming so alienated by this crowd of pro-Israel enforcers that he was moving away from the Protestant church. This is what I've been told. Candace Owens just disclosed this on her live stream. And, he was a Protestant who, as a young conservative voice, and, I believe in evangelical Christian.
He was a Christian nationalist by his own words.
Yes. And he was pushing the idea.
I want to push back on that. There's actually a prominent clip out there of Charlie denying that he is a Christian nationalist. He has called himself both a Christian and a nationalist at different times. You might say, oh, that's the same thing. But actually, he pushed back against a student that accused him of that once. And there's actually a video out there. It's one of those videos where it's, Charlie Kirk destroying, debater or whatever, where he does push back against it. He makes the argument that he is a Christian and he believes that he has a vested interest in seeing the best for his country and his nation. But I don't think he's self-described as that ever.
This Judeo-Christian alliance. And that was like music to the ears of the pro-Israel funders. But now he was starting to attend Catholic Mass with his wife, Erica, and moving in a different direction, what Candace Owens called a spiritual transformation. And the Catholics just don't have that same conceptualization of American Christian nationalism and the Judeo-Christian alliance.
Correct.
This has never been, I don't think it's been reported before. So
yeah, that is true. I hate to say I'm a Protestant, but that is true. There are a lot of dispensationalist Protestants and evangelicals compared to Catholic counterparts. I will say you'd be surprised how many Catholics I meet that are, very pro-Israel, want to support the Zionist project, the Greater Israel Project, kind of carry that Israel first mentality. And that includes, by the way, senators in the U.S. government, including Bernie Moreno and Lisa Murkowski and Eric Schmidt and Dan Sullivan. There's lots of members of the House of Representatives that vote for every aid package to Israel, by the way, and are Catholics that supposedly don't believe in dispensationalism, which does add to this Israel first mentality. But they are right about that. Catholics generally seem to not have the same viewpoints on this compared to many evangelicals. That's the truth, but I'm just saying it doesn't really manifest that way in terms of government most of the time.
He was undergoing a transformation, a singular figure in the Trump world, unreplaceable, sort of a unique figure in that world. And he was moving on this question, and there really wasn't anything they could do to stop him, because you couldn't just, I'm sure there would have been an attempt, and there already was, through figures like Ben Shapiro and Mark Levin at Fox News, to attack him and sort of suggest maybe he should be removed. But you can't really just remove someone like that who's built this entire gigantic infrastructure around himself. So we really don't know where things would have gone. But these two stories together, I think, paint a picture of it's a wider history of where the conservative movement itself is going.
Yeah, totally. This is the epitome of that conversation, and I've watched this closely. There are more and more figures on the right peeling off of this pro-Israel narrative. You saw Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens do it for quite some time, but people like Steve Bannon are talking about it. They're still, doubling down on some of the pro-Israel propaganda. Megyn Kelly is asking questions now, and that's enough for a lot of people to throw her under the rug and threaten her. She's talked about the threatening text messages she's received and her frustrations with that, including with Charlie about a month ago on the Megyn Kelly show. A lot of people have cited that show as where Charlie Kirk talks about some of these threats he's getting and these text messages trying to keep him in line. And then Charlie Kirk complaining that he can't even criticize Israel as a, Israel supporter. And he says that in that video. You can't criticize Israel, as much as an Israeli can criticize Israel, despite all of the pro-Israel causes that he's supported over time. That video is also filled with lots of pro-Israel propaganda, including both of them talking about and aligning on what their view is, that all the pictures coming out of Gaza are Hamas propaganda because they want nothing more than to portray Israel wrongly that way. I think that's garbage, but that's, part of the things they said, denying the genocide, denying the starvation. Things like that are all part of that video too, but there is interesting moments too.
And the kind of the astroturfing from pro-Israel 1%ers to prevent that.
This will undermine Trump's support on this issue substantially. So his good buddy, the Vice President of the United States, is a Catholic convert. Candace Owens is a Catholic convert. Mrs. Kirk is a born and raised Roman Catholic. This probably terrified the Christian nationalists, the Mike Huckabee types, and their wealthy American, mainly New York Zionist financiers.
JD Vance doesn't terrify them in any way. He's basically one of the most pro-Zionist people in the world. Yeah, Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson do, but JD Vance? JD Vance is a total pro-Israel Zionist shill to the core, so that's the only reservation I would have with that. But
do we know from your sources what Kirk himself thought of Netanyahu? Did he feel intimidated by Netanyahu?
Yes, absolutely. And I think the reason that anyone initially started talking to me was that Netanyahu came out while Charlie Kirk's body was still warm and started lying about him and trying to recast him as his best friend. Now, it's true, right. Charlie Kirk was, until fairly recently, certainly before October 7th, 2023, the most important Gentile asset that Israel might have had today, possibly more important than Trump, because Charlie Kirk was preaching the pro-Israel gospel to young people, and he was potentially on his way to becoming president or senator, someone very important to Israel. So he, as soon as he starts to make some noises after October 7th about Israel's misdeeds, but particularly about Israel's malign influence in Washington, and then he experienced the pressure from pro-Israel donors like Bill Ackman, Netanyahu enters the picture. And Charlie Kirk, according to a longtime friend of his who I spoke to, considered Netanyahu a disgusting bully who was a manipulator and was fundamentally dishonest. And
yeah, Max's piece does show this, and this is consistent with what his article says. Here we have it. It talks about that Kirk's resentment of Netanyahu that his unnamed source talked about was spreading within Trump's inner circle beyond Charlie Kirk, by the way. And they said that the president himself felt it too. This unnamed source that was a close friend of Kirk. He also talks about the fact that they found listening devices in the bedroom after Netanyahu had used the toilet of Boris Johnson and of officials in the Trump administration. That's something that Max broke here. And this is all according to this source. It's also notable that Harrison Smith of InfoWars said that he talked to another associate of Kirk, who he confirmed was not the same source as Max's, presumably by asking his source, did you talk to Max Blumenthal too? And him saying no, saying Charlie Kirk was afraid for his life that someone from Israel might kill him for, turning down this infusion of cash and this, meeting with Netanyahu that they were going to try to set up. So interesting things all around here.
This stands at complete odds with the picture Netanyahu has tried to paint in not just one, but I think 5 or maybe 6 tweets since Charlie Kirk was killed. And additionally, I think it's important to recognize what Netanyahu was doing. He was trying to do the same thing he did after 9/11, when the Israeli publication Ma'ariv reported in 2008 that Netanyahu said 9/11 is good for Israel.
If you think that's hyperbole, that's true. Look that up. Netanyahu did say that. He came out later and said, clarifying, it's good that America sees, the treachery in front of us and that we can align with America to fight it or something like that. I'm paraphrasing what Netanyahu said, but that is true. What Max is saying is right about that.
And he thought that he wanted to exploit Charlie Kirk's killing in a way that benefited Israel by pushing a narrative of religious warfare and Islamophobia inside the US. And he blamed Islam and radical Muslims and the left for killing Charlie Kirk before the suspect was even known, before anyone had even been caught. And so the truth and the reality about Charlie Kirk's relationship with Netanyahu turns Netanyahu's whole sectarian militaristic narrative on its head.
Here's
Yeah, before we go further, I totally agree with this. Netanyahu is acting as the master manipulator, the master propagandist. He always is, saying that, Charlie Kirk was such a good friend of mine. He was so close to my friends and family. Now he's dead. And, pieces of this are true, that Charlie Kirk supported Israel and Zionism beyond almost anyone in the conservative movement. He was asking more questions toward the end of his life. I don't look at most of it as a turn against Israel. At no point did he say, Israel's enacting a genocide in Gaza or drawing the U.S. into stupid wars. In May or June, back when the president bombed Iran, he did say that the U.S. shouldn't do that, and he pleaded with Trump not to do that because it would, back the narrative that the warmongers in Washington, the neocons that have always wanted this, wanted. But he never said that, this was Iran's fault or anything like that. This is a mixed bag, and I'm really glad for the nuance, I think, that Max is bringing here, this balance between, yes, Charlie Kirk was a stalwart supporter of Israel for a long time. Towards the end of his life, he was starting to ask more questions, though still maintaining some of that propaganda. If you don't believe me, go to Charlie Kirk's video from July 29th of this year on his timeline on Twitter, where he records a 12-minute propaganda video about how all these news things out of Gaza are untrue. Gaza isn't starving the populace. He never backed out of that. Never called it a genocide. Never called Netanyahu a monster, which you would expect from someone that really had truly turned against Netanyahu. But behind the scenes, these things were playing out, and I have no reason to doubt that and how it impacted his relationship with his donors. It's been said by some people that he was worried about financial collapse of his organization. I've seen no proof of that. That's not a claim that Max makes, by the way, but that's been out there too.
Charlie Kirk in August talking to Megyn Kelly, my friend and former colleague, about the people that are attacking him. Chris, cut number 14.
I think I have a bulletproof resume showing my defense of Israel, both on campus, on social media, to great, let's just say mockery and scorn at times, because I believe it. However, Megyn, you're hitting on something very potent and important. Now, let me first say, I don't want to judge an entire group, because there's been many people in the pro-Israel world that have been very sweet, very kind, very nuanced, very Charlie, you're with us, you don't have to agree all the time. However, and I will say this, the behavior by a lot, both privately and publicly, are pushing people like you and me away. My moral character is now being put into question, Megyn. Not my decisions, not like, hey, are you doing this? Is it smart or is it dumb? But no, I am a bad person if I do this. And I could go, you saw it, Megyn. It was trending on Twitter, thousands of tweets and text messages. And if I were to be charitable and generous, I will say the people that are attacking me are in a hyper paranoid state, because they're at war, and war tends to make things black and white, and you're a hammer looking for a nail. So I'm trying to be charitable, Megyn. Literally, I'm trying to cut as much slack as I can, right? I have less ability sometimes online to criticize the Israeli government without backlash than actual Israelis do. And that's really, really weird, isn't it, Megyn? That's not right. Personality types like you, myself, and Tucker, the more that you guys privately and publicly call our character into question, which is not isolated, right? Megan, it would be one thing if
That's
it was
right.
one text or two texts. It is dozens of texts. When the hostile reaction is that now Megan and Charlie are enemies,
Right.
boy, I'll tell you, like you're not gonna, I wouldn't say lose, but you will weaken and just basically deflate two of your strongest advocates if that continues.
Yeah, you can tell the emotions in his face there, and he's being very candid there, presumably about the pushback from his donors, from very pro-Israel influencers and financiers, certainly so. You also see, though, in that clip at the very beginning, he doubled down on his pro-Israel attitudes, and that's something that he's long carried. But man, the frustrations were evident there, and isn't that just so indicative of where the left, or where the right is shifting, where figures like that are shifting, especially with like Marjorie Taylor Greene coming out calling this a genocide, rightly so, and pushing back against this Israel first narrative, even trying to create an amendment to a bill that would deprive Israel of $500 million. She did that. Not anyone from the squad tried to do that. In fact, AOC voted against her amendment that tried to do that, but it is indicative of that shift. He was feeling the pressures. But again, I want to be fair and add clarity here. In this video, they also spend a long time talking about pro-Israel propaganda, the narrative in Gaza being wrong, the starvation being wrong, etc. I just want to make a balanced, thought about that, because it's being portrayed as this was his only attitude during that podcast, and I have no vested interest in how you interpret it. Don't take my word for it. Watch that whole podcast, and I think you'll come away with the same impression, though.
Right about the time that he was summoned to the Hamptons by Ackman and Company.
Yeah, I believe that was August 6th when he said that.
Correct.
I struggled to pinpoint the precise date of the meeting, but it was right around that time, because I managed to dredge up Instagram photos from some of the influencers who I confirmed to be at the meeting, especially photos by someone named Xavier de Rousseau, who I'd say very few people watching this have probably heard of.
No, I never heard of him.
I hadn't heard much about him before. I reached him on the phone. Like everyone else who attended this meeting that I reached, he was flustered, freaked out by my call, immediately went silent. He was in a state of panic. They're all nervous about being identified with this meeting. Xavier de Rousseau is a employee of PragerU, which is this conservative indoctrination outlet that focuses on youth.
That is the right way to portray PragerU, by the way, I hate to say.
Including young people,
This
very
is
young.
another Christian nationalist gaggle.
Run by Marissa Straight, who is a Jewish Zionist who served in Israel's Unit 8200 cyber spying division.
Oh, boy.
And Xavier de Rousseau was sent with Israeli government money to a Gaza Humanitarian Foundation site 2 weeks after that meeting in the Hamptons, where he mocked the famine in Gaza in very disgusting fashion, said Hamas leaders are on Ozempic because they're getting so fat off all the food they're getting. And that's his role. That's the role of many of the other influencers who are sent there. And that's what Charlie Kirk was surrounded by there, along with Bill Ackman, who apparently organized this entire thing, who has been, just since October 7th, strong-arming his way through institutions across this country to bully them into pro-Israel submission. And apparently his next target was Charlie Kirk because of what Charlie Kirk was doing at TPUSA.
Yeah, that's the purpose of the AIPAC trips, by the way, that Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and others have talked about, is to present a very rose-colored glasses view of Israel and the U.S.-Israeli relationship, be so warm to these U.S. congressmen and U.S. senators, and present, this rosy picture of how great the U.S.-Israeli relationship is, never taking them to, where they're conducting a genocide, let's just say, never taking them to any of the bomb sites and, the rancid effects of U.S. foreign policy as it manifests in the Middle East in tandem with Israel, never doing that. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to take them on a special tour with guided, prearranged angles to it to draw the American right back. That's what I presume they're trying to do with Charlie Kirk too. This is not really much of a mystery.
Specifically allowing Tucker Carlson to come on stage and referring to Bill Ackman as a Jeffrey Epstein associate who was a scam artist and a charlatan who had made his money through nebulous means. And so it all kind of fits together.
Why do you think Netanyahu felt the need to go on national television and expressly deny that Israel assassinated Kirk? I mean, who does that?
Yeah. Why do millions of people, I mean, you see it all over social media, they think Israel had some involvement because of the way they've been conducting themselves around the world in the region. Netanyahu's not just waging a 7-front war, he's carrying out an assassination spree in broad daylight all across the region, including inside a U.S. ally.
Yeah, he's talking about Qatar there, but I love Max's reaction just to laugh. It is so preposterous, isn't it? But, you know, lots of people brought these things up almost immediately after his death, talking about motives and who benefits and who could be behind this whole thing. But to play, you know, I'm just going to try to add some more clarity here. He answered that because he was asked that by Greta Van Susteren. She said, you know, can you put some response to this idea that you assassinated Charlie Kirk? And, you know, he answered it from there. So at least in the first example, I'm not sure about other examples, he was actually asked it by a journalist. He didn't just jump out there and say, hey, by the way, I didn't kill Charlie Kirk. But Max's reaction was great, though. This is pretty unprecedented, you know, to have to deny that. But hey, Israel's guilty of all sorts of political assassinations. And if you don't believe me, just look on the Wikipedia page for that, which recently had to be separated by decade because there's so many names of political figures that Israel has assassinated.
And you have this record of Charlie Kirk, which backs up everything I heard on Background, going out in public. And you can see he's anguished. He's angry. He's almost like on the verge of going crazy because he's under so much pressure from Netanyahu's cutouts in the United States. So, you know, people are taking the reality and to another level where it's an unsubstantiated theory. I have no evidence that Israel had any role in Charlie Kirk's assassination, but they're taking it there because of what they know about Israel and its capabilities and its ruthlessness. And along with the fact that the official story just keeps collapsing and is so murky and filled with contradictions that no one knows really what to make of any of this.
Well, that's the truth, too. You'll innately cling to alternative explanations when the FBI provides you with one that's so preposterous, maybe more preposterous than their JFK story or their Waco narrative, or, you know, the Ruby Ridge narrative. All these tales that the FBI spins have been such lies that the American people innately cling to alternative explanations. I don't blame them for that. And Max is being a very responsible journalist here by printing this piece, keeping his source secret, and also not going to the lengths where he said, well, this means Israel killed Charlie Kirk. He's being responsible for it. He's open to, you know, more information. He said in another podcast, I think with Tim Dillon, that there might be some more reporting on this soon from the Gray Zone. But he's a heroic journalist. I'm so glad to read this piece and consider it. But what I'll say about this, I don't blame people for having the suspicion that, you know, Israel or Mossad or the CIA or, you know, any other number of intelligence agencies may have been involved in this. I do want to know what Charlie Kirk's family thinks about this too, because presumably the people close to Kirk will not have been as close to Kirk as Erica Kirk, and what she thinks about it too. So I really want to know what she thinks about it, whether it's worth pursuing, if she buys into this at all. I really want her to be provided with this information because the feds are not going to investigate this if any piece of it is true, if there really is an Israel connection. It also behooves people that are so dug into this narrative, and again, I don't blame people for wanting to entertain it, discuss it, analyze it, etc., at least consider the possibility given the motives. I think it behooves those that are very convinced of this narrative to link it to a shooter. And if you don't believe it was the shooter that the FBI is pinpointing, Tyler Robinson, provide an alternative. Show me a paper trail. Show me a money trail. It behooves you to do that because that was the case when we were looking at, you know, Oswald. And there's many theories still regarding JFK, but we know he had CIA surveillance connections and connections to the Soviet government. And that was known before this recent document release. So if you're very convinced of this narrative, make some connections, lay out your case. Don't just default to, well, the Fed narrative sucks, so Israel did it without a shadow of doubt. That's not the right way to handle this in my eyes. And, you know, I just think a lot of this narrative is a little sloppy if you're so convinced that Israel did it. And I'm not even saying Israel didn't do it, and I'm not shutting down conversation about it. I'm just very skeptical of people that are so dug out on a position either way now, given the holes in the story, but given no connections that we've seen in the holes of the story to Israel yet, in my mind. Make your case. Make your link to Netanyahu, the IDF, Mossad, or whatever. I'd love to see it. Most people I see that are pushing this, that are totally convinced that Israel ordered this hit, aren't making those connections. But if you have them, let me know down below. I appreciate Max. Let me know, what do you think of this? Do you think that Israel was culpable in this in any way? What are the motives here? You know, what are the pieces of the Fed's narrative about this shooting that's so wrong? And is Max the best journalist in the world? I think he's up there. Let me know down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, also subscribe to Napolitano, and please consider becoming a YouTube member. If you click the join button below, you can get access to all of my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube, the ones that are members only right now. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.